When it comes to considering travel in South America and really just all of Latin America, as Americans, we really don't have that great of an idea of the differences between each country. I mean, before I traveled to Argentina, I had no fucking clue what was going on in that country. I just knew that Javier Milei was elected, and I just said, yeah, fuck it, why not? I ended up staying for 7 weeks, so it's not like I took a one off trip just for 5 days and returned to the US. Because I was there for so long, I feel like I have a really good idea of the Argentinian culture, and I can only speak about Buenos Aires because I was there the whole time. So without further ado, here are the things that I learned about Argentina and surprisingly about America as well. One of the things about being an American is we have terrible public transportation in most of our cities and we're proud of it. But Argentina is part of the rest of the world that thrives on public transportation. Most people there travel by bus, travel by subway. Taking Uber is kind of seen as unnecessary or even a little bit luxurious, and you pay a little bit extra when you pay Uber. I think it was like 60 cents to take a bus, whereas I think it was like $5 or $6 to take an Uber one way. So what does this mean? If you're not taking a car to get everywhere, that means you get off on a bus stop, and there's probably a few blocks between every bus stop. So that means people are walking a lot. And what happens when you walk a lot? Well, you're not fucking fat. I would say that while I was in Argentina, that one of the biggest things that stuck out to me is the population when you're walking around. There are no fucking fat people. These people, for the most part, aren't necessarily all in shape, but they walk a lot, so they're just going to be very fit and such. So, fellas, when you go to a new country and there's a population there with no fat people, what do you think that does to the women? That generally means that everyone, especially the ladies, are going to be very thin. And here in the United States, we are not used to that. So when you're walking around there and all you see is a bunch of thin Latina women that have European features, I mean, you're kind of almost like in heaven. And trust me, I'm really not a Latina guy. But being thin and in excellent shape can be very persuasive. It's also kind of funny because the second I opened my mouth, everyone could obviously tell that I'm an American. If you look similar to me, you'll actually be able to blend in relatively okay until the second you open your mouth, which when it comes to safety is actually pretty useful. It's almost kind of like accidentally getting an extra layer of defense from camouflage. If you go to a place like Colombia or Ecuador where they look way more indigenous, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. So when it comes to safety, we have this perception in the United States that anything in Latin America is extremely dangerous and we should avoid it at all costs. But in Buenos Aires specifically, I felt pretty safe for the most part. However, you do really need to know the rules of Latin America. For example, we take phones for granted here in the United States. You can walk around with it, no one's going to steal it because everyone here has phones. However, over there, not everyone uses phones. And if they do, sometimes their phones are a lot shittier. How many times did I meet with someone and they didn't have data connection on their phone? So that meant like I couldn't actually talk to them unless they just happened to get on Wi-Fi themselves. Somehow my data was perfect the entire time I was there. I was pleasantly surprised by that. Yeah, I couldn't make phone calls, but I can make Wi-Fi calls, and texting and data were always available, which is key because when you're in a city where you don't know what the hell you're doing, you want to have data because Google Maps is going to save your ass. I was surprised even though with all the public transportation, it was actually kind of a facade. And when you talk to the locals though, they'll actually tell you that the people who have the cars are generally the ones who live very far away outside the city, and they have to commute in and out of the city. Don't forget, Buenos Aires is a humongous city. Obviously, Argentina only speaks Spanish, but some people do speak English, but it's pretty far and few between. Now, I couldn't believe this when I saw this, but even though I felt like not that many people spoke English in Argentina, Argentina actually has the best English-speaking rate of all the countries in Latin America. And somehow our neighboring country of Mexico has the worst English rate in all of Latin America? How does that make any sense? The country that's furthest away from us has the best English, and the country that's closest to us has the worst English. The point I wanted to make is if you go down to that country and you don't speak any English, it's not that big of a deal because with Google Translate you can get away with pretty much most things. However, I do recommend if you have the time and the availability to, try to learn at least some Spanish because the locals will be very, very happy to at least try to help you or be a little more understanding about you. And don't forget, Buenos Aires is a pretty international city, so when you go there, they're going to have the best English-speaking rate in the entire country. I have friends that went to Rosario or other places, and they basically said that the English rate was pretty terrible there. Something you should also know is if you have some basic Spanish understanding, it may change a little bit over there because they speak with such a heavy accent. They take the double L and make it a sh sound the way we use SH, so double L for them is SH. So if you say something like pollo, it's actually pocho for them. And trying to remember that is really infuriating and confusing, at least at first. For example, in my grade school, we were taught Spanish from Spain. And it's very easy for us to assume, oh, Spanish, it's the same everywhere. How could it not be? Well, it's kind of like English everywhere. It's not exactly the same, duh. So keep in mind that their Spanish is unique to the south part of South America. Them and Chile are kind of seen as the two countries that have this weird Spanish form that all the other countries kind of make fun of. Which brings me to my next point, and this really just blew my mind. When people speak English, most of the time when they get taught English in school or they go out of their way to learn English, they end up learning like the British form of English. For example, I had a friend down there and he was watching The Simpsons, which is obviously made in the United States, but he still said things like 8:30, and you know, we kind of look at that phrase And we think to ourselves, boy, I haven't heard that phrase in about 60 or 70 years. Like my grandparents might say something like that, or quarter to eight, or stuff like that, but we don't really say that in America anymore. And that brings the next point, which is when they try to pronounce certain words, sometimes they go with the British pronunciation and they don't realize it, so you might not actually be able to understand it. It's very strange and almost like an outer dimensional experience. This whole America not being the only country that speaks English. I also met Europeans there, and once you go there, you kind of realize Britain's really close to everything else in Europe. I guess if they're going to learn English, it's going to be British English, because in North America, we're so far away from everyone else in Europe, and a lot of people in South America that it kind of makes sense that they would learn the original British English. And speaking of the Europeans, the Argentinians actually have a very European look. They're kind of like this European white, maybe not pale blend, but they certainly don't look indigenous like people like in Peru do. Most of the time they were actually pretty deceptive because they looked like white people. Some people are whiter than I am and they don't speak English. So if you do meet some people there, just be prepared to be kind of seen as like the exotic kind of North American, right? I was actually really hard pressed to find any other Americans. I found less than 10 Americans in 7 weeks, so that was very surprising. I thought there would be more of us down there. But then again, it makes sense. It's 5,000 miles away. The food was pretty good. The two things I liked the most were milanesa and asado. The asado was really quite excellent. It didn't live up to the expectation, but it also depends on where you go. I got asado with a friend one night, maybe it was a 7 out of 10, and I got asado 2 nights before I left, and that was very good. So if you can go to a place called Paria Peña, highly recommend it. Over there, they're going to call it Parisha Peña. The milanesa is kind of like this gigantic chicken breast looking thing, but it's got like breaded flour on it or something, I don't even know. But it was really quite good, and it was uniquely flavorful. Also, one of the best food items I had there was called Papas Bravas, and I went to this Irish themed place, and they had food there from like Ireland and such, right? And I tried this Papas Bravas because it was one of the only things I could understand on the menu. The potato wedges came with a kind of jalapeno sauce, and it sounds terrible, but it was one of the most delicious things I've ever eaten. And the meat isn't just good when you go out, it's also good when you just go to the grocery store. Not only are you buying it at a discount in comparison to America, a kilo of beef, which is like roughly 2.2 pounds, was only like $7 or $8. Maybe it was like $5. I can't even remember, but I just remember looking at it and being like, holy shit, you couldn't get that here if you tried. Of course, you have to go to a specific store for that most of the time. I went to a carniceria, or a meat shop, called Res. The rest staff was pretty nice. No one could really speak English, so trying to communicate with the butcher was a little challenging. But overall, yeah, it's a lot cheaper there, obviously. And that doesn't just apply to food, it's really everything. Go figure. And now for one of the more interesting observations I found when going down there. Fellas, you'll be especially interested in this one. When it comes to using online dating, it's like you step into another dimension or go into another galaxy somewhere. I doubt that this is exclusive to Argentina, but if you've used dating apps for the last on and off 9 or 10 years or so, kind of like I have, you would definitely have noticed a drop-off around 5-6 years ago where the dating apps got ridiculous. It felt like in 2015, 16, and 17 I could find a date with really no effort at all. And when it comes to 2024 and 2025, I feel like I get no matches at all whatsoever. I've been the same height for the last 10 years. You can only come to one conclusion, that something changed on the app side. But all that disappeared when I went to Argentina. I mean, literally, within 24 hours, I was getting messages and likes more than I'd probably gotten in the last 6 years combined. I don't know, it was something out of another dimension. In the last 6 years on Tinder and Bumble, I can probably count on my fingers how many times I've had matches, let alone getting messages from them. I mean, I'm not kidding, it was probably like 100 chicks that I had liked, and they literally sent me a message. I couldn't dream of that here. I guess as a whole, I wasn't really that impressed with nightlife, but I'm not really a nightlife guy. I find it actually really torturous. There are a lot of people that talk about Palermo. I found it to be a little underwhelming. It was kind of like this almost restaurant strip where people would kind of sit outside near a little fire, because I was there during the winter, and they would kind of just hang out with their friends. And you know, there were some people dancing, but not many. Now granted, I didn't go inside, and probably when you go inside it's a total fuck fest. So what do Argentinians like to do in their free time, and what activities can you do that you can kind of associate with them? Something I noticed is that they really like to go to the park, and they'll be happy to either spend time with their friends, grab a little picnic blanket, hang out with them, they'll share mate with their friends, or they'll get a book and read it. I feel like I pretty rarely see people at parks reading books, at least in the States. A huge thing that they really like there is soccer, so if you go there, don't call it soccer, they'll kill you for that. They love their football just like any other country in South America. It's funny because when you say something like, oh, I don't really like music that much, or you don't really like soccer that much, or football, they'll think you're a total lunatic or a weirdo. The way that I've made some friends there was going to international language exchanges. You can just go to meetup.com and there's plenty of groups there, and in doing so, you never know who you're going to meet. The best decision I made was actually finding this international frisbee group. They're awesome. I would say 95% of them speak English. You go play frisbee with them for a few hours. It's a great way to meet girls if you're into that, because it's co-ed. And after everything's said and done, you can go with them to a cafe afterwards and just chit chat and get to know them. Highly, highly recommend them because there's probably someone in that group that you'll find there. I would say it was usually about 15 to 20 of us. And I went every week, and I never regretted it once. And that's where I organically met a few other Americans. But surprisingly, there were actually a lot of Russians there. And realistically, only 2 or 3 people couldn't speak Spanish. I'll put the link for it in the description so you can find it. They're very responsive and very wonderful people. I have nothing but good things to say about them. The work culture is very different down there. They don't work as many hours as Americans do, obviously, and there's a lot more servers and kind of service-based industry stuff going on. For example, they have cafes on every corner and someone has to work those. They also tend to take longer breaks than we do. I think the craziest difference between all the scheduling and such is they actually have dinner at like 10 p.m. or like 9 or 11 p.m. sometimes. It's like kind of ridiculous. But since I'm such a night owl, I really just blended in. Also, once you tell them you're from the United States, they'll actually call you a Yankee, but because they also use the Y for the sh sound, just like with the double L, they're gonna call you, instead of a Yankee, they're gonna call you a Shanky. I found that crazy. Obviously in the States, we think Yankees are that's like a really old term. In the historical context, Yankees a really old term. I mean, come on, they're obviously not talking about the New York Yankees. So it's just fascinating to hear that that's the word that caught on. One of the craziest paradigm shifts I had there was learning that they actually see Europe as the West and not the United States. They see us as this weird North American country that's nowhere near Europe. Europe is kind of the central hub for a lot of activity, in their eyes. And someone had to explain this to me, but it makes sense because we have such a strict visa system when trying to get into the United States. When they go abroad traveling, they go to Europe, not the United States. And it makes complete sense, right? Because they have to get visas to get into the United States. And it's such a pain in the ass for them that they'd rather just go to Europe, which is hassle-free, instead of going to the United States. If they want to go to the United States, they really better mean it, with all the effort they're going to put forth. And finally, I want to say that in my 7 weeks there, I want to say that I saw about 6 black people and maybe 7 Asian people, grand total. It was astoundingly homogenous. And go figure, when you're in South America, the people who are in South America are not going to be from that part of the world. One of the other fascinating things is the way that they see us. We get shamed so much in the United States for not knowing about other cultures because we're so multicultural here. But Argentinians really don't know shit about the United States. And granted, yeah, it's 5,000 miles away. Who would have figured? But the way it is in the United States with our culture, people shame you constantly. And you just go around the world expecting everyone else to know about your country. And obviously, they're not going to know it. So I can come back here and feel very confident about not knowing much about other countries in the world. With Javier Milei being elected, he's this libertarian president. And for a country that's been super socialist for a very long time, he's a very polarizing figure. The inflation there has been really bad, and that's probably part of the reason why he got elected. And just to put it in perspective, 20 years ago, $1 was worth about 3 Argentine pesos, but today it's worth about 1,250 Argentine pesos. Anyway, when you talk to people about Javier Milei, he's about as polarized as Donald Trump. You're either gonna get, man, that guy's really solid, he's really great, I'm really glad that he's trying to tear down this bureaucracy, is more or less what they'll say. Or you're gonna get people who think that he's a total fucking moron, and the people of Argentina are total morons for having elected him. It sounds oddly familiar to a certain president that we've been talking about here in the United States. Something you should also be aware of is they have very strict bank limits, so you really don't want to be using banks down there if you don't have to. I used my Capital One credit card for pretty much everything and it worked pretty perfect. Something fascinating I also learned is the general IQ difference between South America and North America is pretty high. I think the average IQ in the United States is like 100, maybe 99, 98, something around there. But in general in South America, it's a lot lower. The average IQ of Argentina is reportedly around like 86 or 7 or something like that, which is not great. By this point in the video, you have to be wondering to yourself, is there anything bad about Argentina? And I would say there was one thing that really caught my attention: trying to take a shit. I did not know this, but when you take a shit in South America, you cannot throw toilet paper down the toilet. Their plumbing is very fragile down there. So if you take a shit and also throw the toilet paper in the toilet, it's gonna clog it and just destroy their plumbing. So what do you do with the toilet paper? Well, you throw it in the trash. Let me tell you, one of the best parts about my plane trip is once I got back to the US of A, I took a great big old shit, and you better believe I put all that toilet paper down there, and my conscience was clear. So by this point in January of 2025, my trip was from August 1st to about September 20th of last year. So by now I've probably forgotten some other details about my trip, but I tried to give you the most comprehensive guide of things I found interesting, and hopefully you find them useful in your decision making of whether you would like to go to Argentina or not. Honestly, if you can go to Argentina, I would definitely do it. I had some of the best time of my life, but I think this is a rule when it comes to travel in general. You really just need to put yourself out there and find various activities to try and integrate yourself into their culture. You're going to be wasting your trip if you're sitting at home the whole time on the internet. So get out there and go talk to some people and see what you can learn.